Thank you so much, David, for sitting with me again.
Thanks for having
It's
me.
really nice. First and foremost, could you give me a quick overview of your career for people who don't know you specifically?
I've worked in animation for 11 years now, 11 or 12. I've worked in games, commercials, and VFX film. Now I'm currently working in games, and I started out working at Activision at Ravensoft back in like '05, and that's where I kind of got my first taste in games. And after that, I went to LucasArts, um, and from there I wanted to try a little bit more cinematic-esque or work more narrative-based. So I got into TV commercials, and then luckily got into film as well. So I got to bounce around a few VFX studios, and that was really fun. So worked at Weta for a little bit, and then Digital Domain and Sony ImageWorks. And then I always wanted to get back into games, so I was working at Naughty Dog, and I went back to Naughty Dog, and so that from there I got to work on really great titles like Uncharted 2. Uncharted 2 was kind of the first time I actually was really like, working on a game is always could get a little frustrating when you're deep down in the roots, and Uncharted 2 got me really excited, and I think from there Uncharted 3 was great as well, and then eventually I got to work on The Last of Us, and that's where I got promoted. I worked as a lead for Lead Cinematic Animator. So now I moved on and tried to explore different mediums. I always wanted to kind of push myself. Worked briefly at Kojima, and then now I'm at Treyarch. So we just recently wrapped up on Call of Duty Black Ops 3. So woohoo!
Nice. So basically, with your current role at Treyarch, could you explain me a little your daily duties?
Yeah, so at Treyarch, I'm a lead cinematic animator. So my daily duties is to take the cinematics and we execute and we work to the vision of the animation director and the game director. So my boss, the animation director, has a certain vision. He shoots on the stage with performances. I'm there to help assist, and then I'll take the data back and we take it to previs, and then we take it to full animation. And then from there, I'm working with other departments trying to facilitate our needs, get what we need, and make sure that my team is always moving forward, right? So if there's any roadblocks or any issues that come up hand and it stops my guys, I'm there to help them. So I would say about 60% of my work is working with my guys, overseeing them, giving them direction and feedback, working to the vision of the directors, and then about 20% is always troubleshooting, helping them. And as a lead, and something that I always want to push and be very adamant about is always anticipating. So always working ahead of everyone, working on the needs of my team and foreseeing any troubles that may come up or any scheduling issues.
Yeah, and this is during production, but what's sometimes a mystery is during pre-production.
Yeah.
What are your roles in pre-production to make sure that everything is set up for the big production after that?
Yeah, so pre-production is always a tricky thing. It's different per studio that I've been at. There's some studios like you're always in this transition after the game. You're working on DLC content, so downloadable content, and you're transitioning into the next project. So you start high level. If you think about it, there's always multiple parts for pre-production, but high level wise, you want to think about what are your goals for the next project. Like, do you want to make your characters feel more real? So you start looking into more facial technology. So it's very open canvas. Like it's a wide game out there. You're trying to reach as far as you can, but you're not sure how you're gonna do it. So you start researching about what you guys are trying to accomplish for the next project. That's sort of the main, like the big high level abstract goals that you have for pre-pro, and then another room for pre-pro is always post-mortem. So after you're done with the project, you always want to reflect upon, or even during a project, you always want to take notes and see what could be better with the pipeline, the tools, and even the workflow communication with other departments. There's sometimes, when you're in the thick of things, there's no time to improve, or it takes more bandwidth from a different department. Like if you need more tools, sometimes you have to run with the tools you have. But you can iterate, but postmortem is great for understanding, evaluating, like what do we need to fix, what do we need to improve on. So that's very hands-on, working with other departments and collaborating. It's like, hey, we may need a better tool for exporting our characters. Like, do we do it more automated, or do we try to export animations on a daily basis using a tool or whatnot to help streamline the work? So you're evaluating the holes or the problems in your workflow, and you're trying to trying to actually execute and get it improved. And obviously, there's no during pre-pro, you're not actually making full content. You know, you're finished with the main game, so you're not making content. So it's easier to iterate on tools and try to get things working. And then the third part of pre-pro, often what happens is you're actually trying to flush out new ideas, like animation-wise. So you're trying to discover, like, okay, if we were working on a new game, how is this character going to move? How is he going to look? So you could have a team working on different previses or animations to flesh out the character. And also, like, do we try to do different style with cameras? You know, do we do something of a new type of cinematography? So that's a whole. It's like working on new content discovery, and then, like, to make the fourth component could, you know, in my opinion, is always learning new traits. Like, do you as a team, you always want your team to grow and learn. So you can always push your team. Do we want to learn, teach them more about cinematography? Do we bring someone in to teach that? Or even acting, do we bring in someone to do acting classes? So it's a good time for animators or any artist to take a step back, kind of relax, breathe again, and then try to push their skill set, improve on areas that they're lacking or they want to show more interest in.
You were talking about defining more of the character traits and how he moves.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples to?
Yeah. So for instance, like for Drake for Uncharted 3, we all know who Drake is by that time, like with Uncharted 1 and Uncharted 2, and we wanted to see work on, like, there was an idea for a cruise boat, like a big boat. So Uncharted is always known for, like, set pieces, like big pieces of environment that would blow up or, like, explode or moving. So we tried to figure out, like, what would Drake feel like on a cruise, on a big ship. Like, what are the different scenarios that he can be in? So me and the lead designer were working hands-on, trying to think of different ideas, wow moments of Drake on this boat. Maybe the boat will crack in half. So how would you do that? Like, is it gameplay? Do we see the boat crack and will Drake jump over and whatnot? Obviously that didn't happen, but there were ideas that we wanted to bounce around, and then we pitched it to the rest of the leads and other departments. There's moments where where the boat was turned over, so Drake is trying to run up the boat before it capsizes, like it drowns or it goes underwater. So those are the kind of different areas we're thinking about how to, like, have Drake on this boat. Those are things that never got into the game, but they're good ideas to try to answer the questions. Like, okay, these are ideas that we tried, they're not going to work, let's scrap it. At least we know we're not going that direction, and we can hone down on, like, the different, we can process of elimination, we can hone down, like, what we want Drake to do.
And what about establishing rules and guidelines for animation for a character?
That's a good question too. So that's always hard. It's like, often it comes with the help of, with Uncharted, it was working with the performers, right? And they, with Nolan was the actor. He brings a lot of personality, and sometimes you have, with the directors, or like Amy was the creative director on the Uncharted 1 and 2 and 3, and she has a certain mindset for who Drake is, but oftentimes the actors will bring their own taste to it, so they have their creative juices or taste, and it influences the character in a positive way. So you kind of have this a compromise, and it becomes a new character because it was a collaborative effort. And same thing goes for animation. Like, an animator can get on and give their slight influence. So for instance, like, there's scenes that I worked on, like with Drake in that airplane scene where he gets shot out, and for me, I wanted to give that a lot of the theme was creating tension, like tension was the key thing. Like, how do we show Drake tense in a plane that's about to rip apart? A lot of it's showing anticipation. So a lot of it's just understanding the theme of that moment and trying to introduce, fitting in the character of Drake, making sure he still is Drake, but introducing that theme, like intensity, tense, trying to keep him in that moment is the biggest thing.
Great. And what is creativity for you?
Creativity it's a pretty unique word, but it's one thing to understand, like, if you see a common character, it's understanding the character and trying to making real choices, not generic choices that we often see a lot. Like, I think the hard one was for Last of Us, like, when, spoiler alert, but when Joel's daughter dies, you know, I think from a performance wise, you know, if someone dies and and you're there to witness it, often we don't you know, there's a lot of layers to showing sadness, and you know, the first gut, you know, instinct or reaction sometimes for sadness is to cry or start weeping or whatnot. But you know, for that scene, one thing that was great for that scene is creative or very realistic or felt natural was that he actually went through denial. He stopped and he couldn't face reality, and that's it's creativity often is making something feel natural, feel real, and it's getting to that choice is very difficult, right? It's asking the right questions and then trying to honing in on that final answer, that creative direction, that creativity. For gameplay, it's very about response. It's very about response and does it feel great as a player and as an animator? Does the moment feel great? You know, do I have great response? So for mocap, we often have to strip out moments, right? Because mocap is very realistic timing. It's very grounded. It's very, you know, it's very real. And for gameplay, sometimes we need it to be snappier. We need it to be quicker for certain parts. Not the whole animation, but for certain parts. So sometimes we have to take out motion. We have to retime things. So you're selecting your key poses to extract, and then you're gutting out some of the parts that you need to retime. And you know, a lot of times I'm stressing for gameplay is like you still want to, you know, if you're stripping out stuff, you're robbing time. So you still want to apply, you know, you're robbing time. Your animation starts to feel weightless. So you still want to have moments where you want to show weight and heaviness quality to your scene. So you try to do that during, you know, whether it's the action or the follow through, the recovery moments of a gameplay moment. That's where you can maintain that weight and quality. So it's a very different workflow if you're doing gameplay with motion capture, and then if you're doing with gameplay with keyframing, it's a different approach. Oftentimes, if it's a very stylized game, like I worked on Marvel Ultimate Lines, very keyframing, very heavy posing because it's Marvel characters, so it's very much you know, you're going pose to pose and you're getting really strong key poses, and oftentimes the workflow is really dictated by how you're working with your boss, whether it's your lead or the game director. Like if they like to see finished product, you know, like, or they like to see your poses, then it kind of makes sense. You need to go pose to pose a certain part of the process. It's really understanding how your director wants to see work in progress, and then crafting the way you work with your team and showing that work, whether it's like weekly or like every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get to go on a mocap shoot and work with the stunts and the actors.
Yeah.
What's your role on the set?
Yeah, so if it's what we call performance capture is when we do the full-on face and body. That's when we're doing more the narrative, cinematic-esque moments where it's third person and we're telling a story. So that's very involving. It's like an intricate setup time. And so my boss is the cinematic director. He's the one on set as the performance. He's dictating, he's understanding the story, he's working with the actors. My job is there to make sure, I'm the assistant director, so I give him a fresh perspective. If I catch anything that we missed, or maybe the set is different, or like the circumstances of the scene is changed because of gameplay, I'm there to help him catch any mistakes or give him that fresh perspective. For any stunt days where we do action scenes, like we're doing body, whether it's action moments or cinematic moments that we want to re-pick up, I'm there to direct the stunt guys. So I give them feedback. I let them know what the setting is, you know, the content, what's going on in the scene that they're about to shoot, what actions I want them to do, where to go, and so forth.
Great. What was the biggest obstacle in your career, and how did you overcome it?
Biggest obstacle. I was always into action, and I think the biggest obstacle was transitioning from doing a lot of fight, combat, action stuff into more narrative, cinematic, a lot more on performance, and that's something I always wanted to do. So, you know, I tell my students a lot too, like just focus on one area, one craft, and there's a lot to learn in animation, right? Like, and you know, we're gonna be in this industry for a long time. Like, we don't really retire until you're 60, so like I'm still gonna have a lot of time in my career. So I focus on one thing at a time, and I wanted to transition from doing combat to more narrative, more cinematic, and I think that was the biggest hurdle for me. I'm doing facial. I was so afraid of doing facial because I didn't do it for years. I was never good at it, never comfortable, and I just took one step at a time, like embracing my mentors, people who helped me, grabbing any help I can get from peers or any tips from the internet or just people around me, and just embracing that, always learning. And I think little by little, I just started honing my craft, and as long as you're open and receptive of feedback, I think that's the biggest thing. And little do you know, it's that process, day in, day out. You're building, you're improving your skill set, and one day you look back like, holy crap, how did I do that? And people are always evaluating you, right? Like people are always watching you in a good way, and that's why I tell people, always do your best, always be positive, because you don't know, someone might be there evaluating you, and who knows, you could be promoted or given more responsibilities, and one thing leads to another, and you tend to, you become who you are. It's like you do influence people without you knowing. So if you're positive, it rubs off onto people, and it's very contagious.
And on the opposite, what was your biggest victory? The moment you were the most proud of?
Last of Us. When we finished that, I was very proud, and the feedback we got, and like how excited people were, was probably the best feeling, I think, in terms of my career. I think when we finished the project, it was still unknown, because obviously brand new IP, 4 years in the making. So we had a good feeling about the game, but we had no idea it was that well received. And I think just in terms of quality of the animation, I'm very happy and very proud of the team and everything that we did. I mean, when you're in the thick of things, it's always tough to see it when you take a step back, and it's hard. We would feel it from time to time, but I think for something like The Last of Us, it's very much, it's pacing. It's very much, the entire game is about pacing, and if you don't understand that, games today, people want pacing always at this high, so pacing is very a dictated pace, and so it's hard for us to see that if you don't play the whole game. But if you play the whole game, you can take a step back and see it was very rewarding to see this finished product and getting all the reviews we were getting. So that was probably one of the highlights of my career so far.
You were talking about creating a new IP. What would be the challenges that you did not anticipate creating a new franchise?
So creating new IP is always tough, and working in games, it's the iterative approach. It's something you can't be married to your work. You can try 4 or 5 different types of combat moves or different types of moments, right? But sometimes you could get all 5 or 4, changed, or worse, just scrapped. We don't want to do it, we delete it. So it's very hard. You have to understand that it's an iterative approach. So you can't be married to your work. You have to understand it's trial and error. You're trying prototypes. You're iterating at different circumstances. You want to try this, you want to try this, and then you have something to show for. You can show 10 different things, and hopefully a few of them stick. Best case scenario, all 10 stick, but you have to understand it's very iterative, and it may not make it to the game. But that's how you answer those questions, like who this character is, and what are those cool moments or wow moments, and a lot of it too. I keep in mind, like photography. Like you see great photos from like Ansel Adams or whatnot, and those great photos that we see on posters. Like little do we know, he probably shot like thousands of photos, but it's only one that he shows for. And it's the same thing in animation. We have like, you show the greatest pieces on your reel, right? But little do people know, it's like you probably did hundreds of animations behind the scenes. But and that's what kind of keeps people, like my students or like some of my guys on my team. I tell them, hey man, I know it's tough, but just hang in there. There's always that one animation that's going to stick, and we're going to go with it, and that's all we're going to that's what you have to show for it. It's going to look great.
Mm-hmm. And you've worked a lot in your career on third person action games.
Yeah.
But recently you've worked on Black Ops 3 with the first person.
Yeah. So Black Ops 3 was a little bit different. So we have first person moments, obviously, when you're playing a game, and then one thing we introduced for Call of Duty franchise for the first time was doing third person camera cuts. So it was the first time you actually get to see your player from a different camera angle within gameplay. It wasn't a loading movie we cut to and then we show. We try to keep the player immersed so that you feel like you're there, you're still part of the game, and then we go back into gameplay. So first person is always challenging. From an animation standpoint, you can't, a lot of the things that we take for granted, you can't show for, right? Like you can't show the character gesturing with his hands too much. It has to be within the camera. So it's a lot more reliant on the head and the camera. So you have to understand how to manipulate a scene. You know, we don't want to cheat. If we're doing a look, it's not just all head and camera, because we can still see our buddy from a different co-op player. So we often have to animate the character full body, and then see what the head looks like, the camera looks like on the head. If it's too jittery or whatnot, then we disconnect the camera from the head and we animate the two separate. But we try to keep it, you keep it, you almost think of it as two animations. So oftentimes when we get into a third person moment, we still have a first person cinematic moment to transition. So we have to take it from gameplay into into a cinematic moment before we cut. So you often have to ground yourself with the animation. You can't go too crazy with the head looks. It has to be a lot more simplified in their performance.
Nice. Working in the game industry can be sometimes tiring with schedules that aren't
Favorable.
Yeah. Do you have any tips and tricks to overcome the challenge of the schedule and the pressure?
Tips and trick for animators?
No, yeah, for
overcoming pressures. Yeah, I think
overall.
I think the hard part is like, because now we're adults, and the hardest thing, as a kid, your parents always tell you unwind or do this, do that for your safety, right? There's no one else looking out for us anymore, and the hard part, maybe if your wife or your significant other, it's to unwind. It's really to uncheck yourself from the project, because you get so close, and it's great that you're close, but sometimes you do need to take a step back, because if you're working on something close, you don't really see certain things. Like you could have a different perspective, if you take a step back, or even stepping away from your animations for a week and then coming back, and then you're like, wow, I just noticed that, because I have a fresh perspective. This is kind of going off tangent, but obviously getting feedback from other people, different perspective, fresh eyes. I'm very keen on that, getting fresh eyes from everybody, right? Just getting feedback. But back to the main topic, is just really unwinding, like having hobbies that you can do. A lot of it is exercise. It sounds really really simple, but exercising will kind of clear your mind. And having a hobby or something away from animation is always healthy, just to uncheck yourself, just to separate. It's great to have animation as a hobby and so forth, but when you're that close, you definitely need to take a step back.
And through the years, sometimes your motivation isn't as high as you'd like.
Yeah.
What keeps you motivated and inspired?
I think seeing all the cool trailers from all the other studios, whether it's like Blizzard or Blur, and they do amazing work. You're seeing a lot of live action films. Like nowadays, when we do, it is tough. Like whether you're junior animator or you're senior or lead, there's days where we do need that boost. You need that confidence, because you're gonna have tough days, and getting a sense of community at work really helps. Like team camaraderie, fostering that team camaraderie really is helpful. It's just a picker upper, like someone who's there to just help you out or pick you up that one day. And if you have that sense of community, it really helps, because it does become a grind. It does become a tough job, because we're in it together. But if you can have that sense of teamwork and ownership, that really helps you get through those tough days. But for me, it's like a lot of it is lately I've been really into cinematography, so it's watching a lot of live action, like whether it's movies or TV series. And HBO has a lot of great TV series, and even watching The Wire.
Yeah. And with the experience that you now have, what would be the best advice that you would give your younger self?
It's being patient and understanding process. Patience is the number one thing. I think back then I was always eager to show results. It's like quick results, get something done and then show it, right? Because we do live in a fast-paced world where it's like there's social media, you want to see things quick. But the hard things to do in animation and even in life is things take time. It takes patience, learning something, on a day in, day out basis. It takes time, and it's hard to see that you actually learn. Like, it's hard to see the process. If you don't understand it, it takes time. You get often what you get easily frustrated, you get kind of caught up or you're tripped up over something, and you know, little do you know, like with trials and errors, you're actually learning. Like there's sometimes you're animating and it's not working, and you get frustrated, and you know what, you're actually learning because you tried something new that you've never done. That's how you're growing. And if you understand it's a process and be patient, little do you know, like, you know, after you finish a project you look back, then you realize, holy crap, I've really done all this work without me knowing, and it was a process, and it did take time. And if you don't have that patience, you can get easily frustrated and sometimes even give up or get really discouraged and try to, like, you know, change the profession or your interest. You know, if you keep at it, and you little do you know, you're actually working toward your goal.
Great. Thank you so much for sitting with me. It was really nice.
Yeah.